Carolyn Wells is an American poet. We've been talking about poetry coming from various parts of the world in the English language. I've talked to you about Canadian poetry, about Australian poetry, poetry from New Zealand, and remember the other colonies like India and Pakistan and Sri Lanka and what have you. So we are going back to American poetry, and the age that I'm looking at is the second half of the 19th century to the first half of the 20th century. I just want you to pause a moment and look at the events that were happening in the United States of America. We must go back to looking at the Civil War and then, of course, the two world wars. And do you remember the poets that we have talked about earlier? Do you remember Robert Frost? Do you remember Walt Whitman? And do you remember some of the Afro-American poets too? So here we have another woman poet from USA, Carolyn Wells. Carolyn Wells, 1862 to 1942. Can you imagine? She has about 170 titles to her credit. That's also probably because she wrote various genres, from popular mysteries to children's books to humorous verse. Let me give you the names of some of her books to give you an idea of the variety. She has a collection of charades, At the Sign of the Sphinx. Then she has a series of novels for girls, Jingle Book, The Story of Betty, etc. Then she has a book of verse for adults, which she calls Idle Idylls. I'm not pronouncing it wrong. It is the word idyll, I-D-Y-L-L-S. Use a dictionary if you don't know the meaning. Then you have her book of limericks. And almost the last book that she wrote is The Rest of My Life, which is her autobiography. She's not been a very popular poet, but I've chosen this poem for you because I think it is an interesting poem. How to Tell Wild Animals. Probably you remember in our nursery or probably preparatory classes, we talked about wild animals and domestic animals. So let's see how to tell wild animals according to Carolyn Wells. Are there certain qualities we associate with wild animals? Carolyn Wells writes the entire poem in a very humorous tone. Let me begin by reading the poem for you. If ever you should go by chance to jungles in the east, and if there should you advance a large and tawny beast, if he roars at you as you are dying, you'll know it is the Asian lion. Very obviously, these are people from lands where there are no lions roaming freely in the jungles, and therefore she talks about the jungles of the East. Look at the way she introduces each animal. So what is very specific about the Asian lion? The color of its skin, which is tawny, and the roar of the lion. They are dangerous animals, but she talks of them in a very humorous way. Or if sometime when roaming round, a noble wild beast greets you with black stripes on a yellow ground, just notice if he eats you. The simple rule may help you learn the Bengal tiger to discern. I'm sure most of us Indians have seen both the tiger and the lion. And we do know that the tiger is a more dangerous animal. And therefore she says, notice if he eats you. Do you get the humor in the poem? It's probably a poem meant for children. That doesn't mean we adults shouldn't appreciate it. And then she goes on. If strolling forth a beast you view, whose hide with spots is peppered, As soon as he has leapt on you, you'll know it is the leopard. It will do no good to roar with pain. He'll only leap and leap again. She plays with words and she doesn't say leap, but instead she says leap. Probably she wants to give us an idea of how fast the leopard can leap at you. So he's got his hide with spots is peppered. So we've had 3 wild animals that we are aware of. Let's go on to another wild animal. If when you're walking round your yard, you meet a creature there who hugs you very, very hard, be sure it is the bear. If you have any doubt, I guess he'll give you just one more caress. I'm sure all of us are aware of the phrase, a bear hug. You know, it means when you're filled with affection for somebody, you give them a very, very close hug. So if you come across an animal that wants to hug you, he says it's the bear. Remember, they're all wild animals. We are not going to go into shaking hands distance with them. Though, to distinguish beasts of prey, a novice might nonplus. The crocodiles you always may tell from hyenas thus. Hyenas come with merry smiles, but if they weep, they are crocodiles. Remember, we talk about the laughing hyena and we talk about crocodile tears. My dear friends, I want you to remember that she's also bringing in English idioms, English usage. Remember, crocodile tears means when you're not really upset. Tears which have no meaning. And when we talk about the laugh of the hyena, quite dangerous because you know the hyena. The true chameleon is small, a lizard sort of thing. He hasn't any ears at all and not a single wing. If there is nothing on the tree, 'tis the chameleon you see. What is she talking about here when she says if nothing on the tree you see? Because you remember, the chameleon is a creature which has the ability to camouflage. So when it is on the ground, it probably becomes brown in color. When it's up on the branches of a tree with lots of leaves, it becomes green in color. So she's talked about the cat family. She's talked about the lion and the tiger and the leopard and then the bear. And then she's talked about the hyena and the crocodile. And she ends with the lizard and the chameleon. Dangerous animals, but presented to us in such a humorous way. Isn't that right? You just heard the poem. Sounded like a simple poem, it did, didn't it, for you, all of you? Of course. But then, when I read the poem again, I'm really surprised at the number of figures of speech she has. Not one am I going to explain to you, because none of them are new for us. Alliteration, you know, consonants and assonance, you know, enjambment, you know. The humor, of course, is there. Maybe I'll just talk about one, which is inversion. It's come very rarely, so maybe some of you may not remember. You know, I like tea, is how we say it in normal English. But you might want to say tea I like. Now that's called an inversion. So you have in the 3rd verse, she says, a beast you view. It should actually be you view a beast in normal English, grammatically correct English. But in poetry, you could do that sometime. So that is called inversion. And then, of course, we talk about the rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme here is A, B, A, B, C, C. What does that mean? A, B, A, B. So if I look at the first verse, chance is the first line, advance is the third line, east and beast and dine and line. It's actually lion, but when you read a poem, sometimes you might have to take a little leverage and read it the way you want. So dine should rhyme with lime, which is actually lion. Have fun reading the poem. It's a fantastically humorous one. So that was a poem about so many wild animals. Aren't you tempted to go back and read more poems about wild animals? About animals. Why only wild? I can think of a very sweet poem by one of my favorite poets, John Keats. It's called I Had a Dove. From there we could go on to a very serious poem, Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats. The Tiger by William Blake is another very, very popular poem. And if you want fun, you must read The Owl and the Pussycat by Edward Lear. You know, they went on a holiday in a boat. And then you have The Eagle by Tennyson. I could go on and on, but each one of these poems about animals and birds has a story to tell, a story all its own. Happy reading!